Deshefy is our first Connecticut Green Party candidate for Congress in 2008, I believe, in the 2nd Congressional District. And he got himself on the ballot nearly single-handedly. I'm guessing he got 80% of his signatures himself, like pounding the sidewalk. We've been fortunate to be able to keep that ballot line in every election since, which is a gift now this year, when there are so many opportunities that really were lacking in the past. So Scott asked if he could speak to us for 10 minutes or so.
Thanks, thank you very much. Whenever I mentioned the ballot petitioning in 2008, I always remind my daughter that there are some values to being obsessive compulsive, and that's what it took to do that. A million years ago, when I was a graduate student at Clemson University, my wife and I would travel the 1,000 miles from South Carolina to Eastern Connecticut a couple times a year to come back and see the folks in the holidays and a couple weeks during the summer in our 74 Mercury Comet. And it would take 20 hours non-stop. Sometimes we splurge and we travel coach on the Southern Crescent, which was delightful. And then we learned that after a few years of doing this, that it was nice to drive and split the travel instead of doing 20 hours straight, just stopping for gas and occasional coffee and sandwich. And stop in Maryland, spend the night, see some of the sights, or in the Shenandoah Valley of Virginia. One year, we stopped at a place called Newmarket in the Shenandoah Valley. And a battle was fought there in May of 1864. And it's a very interesting battle. First of all, the Union troops, about 11,000, 12,000 troops, came into the valley with the intent of destroying all the crops in Virginia so that Lee's troops would not be fed, and the farmers who were supporting them would suffer and starve themselves, and their families starve. They were met by a ragtag group of Confederates, mostly farmers, as in the case of most of the Confederate Army, shoeless. And some of them had been in the war in earlier years, some had been seriously wounded. There were guys that only had one arm, one eye, that were assembled to take on this Union force. And they were outnumbered over 2 to 1. And in the rear guard of this group of Confederates were 240 VMI, Virginia Military Institute cadets, teenagers and kids, that were supposed to be there just in case things went bad and to possibly fight a rear guard action to protect the retreating Confederates. Well, if you've ever been to Newmarket, there's this long field, and it's not very steep, but it's an incline that goes on a half mile. And the North had the strategic advantage of being at the top of this, and they had their artillery placed there. So you can imagine what it must have been like for the Confederates to try to take that hill. Well, they did. At least the battle was still in balance at one point. There was a heavy rainfall, and then suddenly, out of the blue came these 240 cadets charging up the hill in this heavy rain. They had shoes. Many of them lost their shoes in the quagmire, and the field is sometimes known as the field of lost shoes. 15 of those cadets died. 40 to 50 were seriously wounded, but they took those cannons at the top of the hill and sent the Union Army in retreat. Lee's army was fed. The farmers' families of the Shenandoah Valley were fed, although months later the Shenandoah was torched by Phil Sheridan and Union troops. And so I'm connecting that battle and those VMI cadets to the millennials, the under 40 group, the Sanders-nistas, that have supported Bernie Sanders to this point in time. They are coming in the nick of time for those of us who've been waging this battle, this progressive movement, for all these years in the Green Party. First and foremost, we Greens have been at the forefront of a progressive movement, the precursors of what Bernie Sanders now calls a revolution. Single-payer health care, reducing our military spending and halting imperialist U.S. foreign policies, restoring Glass-Steagall and breaking up the big banks, mitigating global warming, bringing about sustainable local economies, particularly at the local levels, green energy, infrastructure repair, tuition-free college, and more recently, land value tax reform, and a state bank, hopefully, to reduce our property taxes. And hopefully we can talk about a regional one, the people that are running for offices here in Eastern Connecticut. And again, first and foremost, these were and remain the Green Party's issues. And despite Senator Sanders' heroic, Herculean efforts, a progressive movement, as Jill Stein emphasizes, needs a progressive party, and we are and remain the only game in town. This is an exciting election cycle, and perhaps the tipping point we've been waiting for. Younger voters are more discerning, more motivated by a future of long-term consequences, and unpersuaded by the lesser of two evils, false choice, that the media pushes on us in order to continue to make big profits. In that media-instigated battle of aristocratic factions, the two money parties have nominated presidential candidates defined by their negatives. Trump and Clinton are the two most unfavorable presidential candidates in U.S. history. Neither is a plausible champion for economic justice because, let's face it, they're both bona fide members of the 1%. They're mouthpieces for industries, I'd say four industries, steadily bankrupting the middle class. Big learning, big medicine, big banking, and big military. CEOs like J.P. Morgan's Jamie Dimon earn in 3 hours, what most of their employees earn in a year. Meanwhile, the blue-collar, hard-hat working class of post-World War II, and that prosperity that went with that group, has been replaced by a new debtor class, a service and caring economy which denies its workers unions, benefits, and living wages. Just as minorities, particularly African Americans, began to ascend to competitive apprenticeships and were added to seniority lists, poof, NAFTA and other so-called free trade deals shuttered American factories and sent those jobs and capital to Mexico, China, and elsewhere, and enriched corporate benefactors of Democrats and Republicans alike. In an us versus them animosity, we've produced stockpiles of weapons of annihilation and a crippling military budget, as taxpayers unwillingly supporting that budget, and presidents who pretty much wage war whenever, wherever, and however they like, sometimes with congressional complicity, sometimes with Congress just averting their eyes. We are, in essence, as Andrew Bacevich says, prisoners of war in our own country. And we've seen about the bait and switch that's going on. The Democrats say, oh, this is the most progressive platform they've ever had. Well, it's also the most hawkish they've ever had. And we all know that they're going to betray the Bernie Sanders supporters. We saw what happened with the emails, the 20,000 or more emails, and Debbie Wasserman Schultz, thank you. I almost said Schmidt. And just how corrupt the two-party system is. Meanwhile, Pakistan is deploying nuclear weapons controlled by local commanders on the fronts of Kashmir. And too many weapons these days are connected to too many complex but imperfect electronic systems operated by fallible people. The media monetizes civil strife, while disparities in educational opportunities, which I'm sure John will talk about, run across lines of race and economic class. Poorer and minority students may not have access to algebra or accredited classes in music or chemistry, but they sure as hell know about heavy metal because they're drinking them in their school water, if not the water at home. in most of our urban communities. There are 84,000 chemicals in our processed foods and other products yet to be tested by EPA, and it's estimated that over a third of them are likely toxic. America's high plains and Ogallala aquifers are being depleted. We lose an elephant, I read the other day, every 15 minutes to poachers and the blood ivory trade. So the next time you're watching Meet the Press on Sunday morning, and you're listening to some Democrat or Republican talk for 15 minutes, the usual propaganda, two-party propaganda, think at the end of that, is this clown worth an elephant? That's why we've got to do everything we can to elect Jill Stein, our presumptive congressional candidate John, our more local candidates, Ronna, Dagmar, Ian, Colin, Lauren. I don't think I left anybody out, but anybody who's running under the green banner.
Me?
Oh, Jeff. And write, and I say this every electoral cycle, write as many letters to the editor as possible, because the Democrats are going to come at us with all of their multi-millions that they have at their command, with the usual lesser of two evils nonsense, and how we're cutting the legs out from under the Democratic Party, and that's going to elect the new Adolf Hitler, aka Donald Trump. We all know it's nonsense. We've got to convince everybody else out there that it's absolute nonsense. It's a wasted vote. It is a wasted vote if a citizen of the United States cannot vote for the candidate they want in office. As Euripides said, nothing has more strength than dire necessity. So let's be strong together coming this November. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Scott.